Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another CPD webinar from Beamer Education. I'm Costa Constantinou, Director of Educational Service. I know you know who I am because I'm often online at the start of the webinar. So welcome, everyone. And I'm really excited because we've got Hal Roberts, Beamer Associate and author, with us this evening. And the other reason why I'm really pleased is that we have 112 people registered to listen to this webinar today. So wherever you are in the world tuning in, a warm welcome from us, and we really hope you enjoy today's session and also have something to take away, try out in your classrooms, and do come back to us and let us know how that goes, because we're always interested to hear you know, how you're putting some of these ideas into practice. Before I'm going to pass you over to Hal, I just want to mention a few things that we're currently doing at Beamer. I know many of you are connecting with us on social media and have registered to our newsletter, but do sign up to receive our information. We've got lots of blogs, CPD resources that you can use at school and build your CPD libraries. So do sign up for those resources. You know that we offer a range of different ways in terms of delivering CPD, whether that's you know, online or in-house, or through you know, actually going into the classroom and delivering demonstrations of some of the ideas that we actually talk about. Because I always say, and you hear me often, those of you that do tune in, you know, anyone can call themselves a trainer or a consultant, but until you go in and actually deliver some of these ideas within the classroom, I think it just makes us more credible as a company. So you know, do get in touch if you are planning your inset days or training days to see how we can help. The other thing I wanted to say, just before I pass you again over to Hal, who's going to begin the webinar. Hal, do you mind, just because you're in control of this, do you mind going on to the next couple of slides? We are updating our website over the summer, and when we come back in September, you are going to see a completely new resources section, and within that resource section, you will have all our educational papers, our blogs, new CPD webinars that you will be able to listen to again. We're also going to be actually starting with some podcasts, and we've just accredited our safeguarding and leadership courses. So if all that sounds of interest, do actually go onto our website and have a look at what's there, and that will all be free for you to access. And the final thing, I apologize for this, and the final thing is our SEND training day, which is going to be taking place in Larnaca, Cyprus, where I'm originally from, on the 13th of June. It's going to be aimed at SENCOs and educational psychologists. So if you are in an international school that is not too far from Cyprus and you're interested, it's £275 per delegate. If you're interested, then do go onto our website and find out about the course. It's going to be a cracking day, or you can email us at cpd@beamer.co.uk. I think that's enough for me. We will have some questions at the end. So throughout the webinar, if you do want to ask Hal some questions, do send your questions along, and we will have some time to talk to Hal at the end and get those questions answered. I hope you've got pen and paper ready to make notes. And I think we're about ready to start. So over to you, Hal.
Thanks very much, Costa, and it's absolutely brilliant to be invited to do this webinar this evening. And I want to say hello to everyone and welcome to my little presentation, really. I've put together tonight, it's really a greatest hits in some way. It's I've called it a reverie in adventures in learning, because I'm going to skirt the surface of some of the ideas that I'm exploring at the moment in my own work in classrooms. So I hope you'll get something out of it, and I hope you'll be patient with me. There may be some things that I haven't got a script. I'm just going to work through some slides that I've put together that I thought would be of interest to you, that really do get across my main points. I've just got the slide there, which simply says, there's my Twitter handle. There's Costa's Twitter handle as well. If you want to get in touch with me via Twitter after this, that'd be absolutely fine. I'm easily found because of my unusual name, Howell Roberts. So I hope this is of interest to you. There's a photo of me right there. That's me in a primary school, and we were doing something on conservation in that photograph. And that's my photo. I really like that photo because someone's captured me there properly doing some inquiry with children. I'm actually doing some direct instruction. I know that what I was doing in that particular lesson, we were looking at mountains, trees and rivers. I think that was the name of the scheme. And we were looking at geography essentially. And I'm asking some children there about the facts, the things, the actual core knowledge that they're expected to know whilst they're exploring that topic. And those children have put up their hands and they are answering my questions. And whilst I'm asking those questions, the questions start to, if you like, they start to develop and grow. So rather than just me trying to trawl through keywords or trying to play some sort of game of guess what's in the teacher's head, I think what I'm doing there is I'm starting to move towards inviting them to imagine, to actually apply some of this knowledge that, you know, they've been given by their teacher. In the next photo, you can see that some of the things they're saying to me, because we're starting to delve into the imaginative, into the inquiry around the core knowledge, things are starting to go a little bit funny. So I'm actually moving from being the teacher who's operating, if you like, with a direct instructive stance, to a teacher that's being a bit more agile, to a teacher who's being a bit more flexible. And if I may, if you'll allow me, I'd like to just explain how I've got to this point in my own career. I was very much a straightforward classroom teacher. I've been teaching for 25 years this year. And I was an English teacher originally by trade. I would teach texts, I would teach novels. I was particularly fond of teaching poetry. The thing that was a real challenge to me was that the children who populated my classroom in the north of England, by and large, weren't always as interested in English literature as I was. So I had to find techniques, approaches. I had to find a pedagogy that would draw those children in. And I'm not talking about dumbing things down. Rather, I'm talking about protecting them, protecting the children into their learning. So in a way, I could make, if you like, the poems of Tennyson a little bit more accessible. I would protect them into it. And whilst I'm just thinking about that right now, I'm inviting you to think about that. No matter how old the children are you teach, no matter what your subject, how do you protect them into it? I found that actually as an English teacher, it took me a while to really consider that, to the point where I would rearrange my classroom depending on the class. I would rearrange, I would rethink where I would be placing particular tasks in a lesson plan, for example. As a drama teacher, which I also taught, I taught drama, and I knew that there would be children who would be coming to my classroom who would be perhaps a little bit nervous. So when I use the term protecting in, I'm thinking about those children as well. Those children who would come to a drama class apprehensive, uneasy, perhaps with their stomachs churning. I would see it as my job to protect them and help them, if you like, feel at home in the classroom. And this isn't sort of a softly approach. This is actually quite tough, I think, for us as teachers. If you're a science teacher and you're watching this, how do you protect those children into your subject whom you know find science very challenging or difficult? How do you protect them in? I also taught dance, which may be a bit of a surprise to some people viewing this. But I taught dance because we were in a situation at my school where we didn't have a dance teacher for a period of time, so I just stepped in. Along with other colleagues, we covered the curriculum. Now, I was no dance expert, and I'm still not, many would agree with that. But as a dance teacher, I had to do my research, and in a sense, I had to protect myself into it. I didn't have all the knowledge, but what I did have, I feel, was reasonable communication skills, which helped. I felt I could communicate the key skills, the key things around the subject. For 1 year only, also, I had the pleasure of teaching German, which was a real challenge because I didn't speak it. And I learnt along with the children. But I found that actually a warm approach as opposed to a cold approach really set me on my way. The kind of work I do now, I'm still working in class. Yesterday, through the course of yesterday, I taught in primary. I'm a secondary teacher by trade, but yesterday I was in primary, where I seem to find myself a lot now, looking at curriculum. And we were looking at local industry in the north of England. In this case, I was working with children, and we were looking at a factory disaster in 1930, where a factory making explosives, I mean, you can fill in the blanks yourself. There was a tragedy that took place, and the children were examining that. These children were English Year 4 children. So there was some complexity around that. For one thing, the children needed to be protected into thinking about what life was like in 1930 when the disaster happened. So one of the questions I asked those children in order to protect them in was, if we were alive in 1930 and we lived in this town, what didn't we have? So if you just listen to that question again, if we were alive in 1930 and we lived in this town, what didn't we have? And the children, of course, can then talk about technology. They can talk about the Queen of England. They can talk about the fact that World War II hadn't happened. They can bring their own knowledge and imagination in response to that question. And that's the kind of question I've asked in that photograph that you're looking at now. I'll just give you a chance to read that. And I hope you find that as amusing as I do. A description of the wonderful film, The Wizard of Oz, by a TV listings writer, who I think is having a bit of fun with that. Education, learning, teaching, to me, is all about perspectives. And I've felt that, certainly through my career, working a lot where I have worked, in quite tough communities, trying to make learning accessible, we've had to find the things that work. We've had to identify the approaches that work with the children in the room. As I said earlier, I've worked in primary, I've worked mainly in secondary, but I've also found myself working in special setting, which I'll come back to later. But if we just have a think about a broad view of education, I would suggest this. All educational structures are built upon, number one, intention. What is it as a school that we are trying to deliver to our children? It may well be a version of the English national curriculum. It may be that that is our starting point, but we're open to do other things as well, perhaps more pertinent to the country where we're delivering the curriculum. But the intention will be written down. The intention will be a body of work. This is the curriculum that we're delivering, and it is written down here. And that takes me to the second thing, the second point. The first is intent. The second is, how do we implement that curriculum document? If a curriculum document is written down, which it obviously will be, then I would suggest that it is almost dehumanized. It is just a cold, dead thing. So how do we bring it to life? And I would suggest that that is where we start having conversations around pedagogy. And pedagogy is what I'm focused on this evening. How we deliver. Now, I don't think that there is one way of delivering that will work all the time for all children. And yet I see online sometimes that there are many people who do believe that. I think I found one way that helps, and that is what I'm talking about tonight. It's what I've written down, written about in the books I've written. And that is narrative curriculum, a curriculum of inquiry, a curriculum of finding out, a curriculum where children are invited to be bothered about the subject matter that they're studying. So the first thing is intention, the second thing is implementation, the pedagogy, how we deliver, and the third thing is assessment, how we quality assure what it is we're delivering. How do we know children are learning? And in my many visits to schools, I don't actually call myself a consultant or a trainer. I call myself a traveling teacher because I spend most of my time traveling to various schools. In some schools that I visit, the curriculum written down is very impressive. However, the implementation of the curriculum can sometimes be shallow, can sometimes be, as I've illustrated in this picture, it can be on the surface. So that what gets lost is the depth. So children may learn the names of all of Queen Victoria's children and be able to recite those names, but actually they'll know very little else about those people, if you like. The curriculum in its implementation is a dehumanizing process. And that takes me to this image. This is a really great picture of me teaching Seamus Heaney's agricultural poetry about his father. Beautiful poetry. But as you can see, I'm dragging those children through the curriculum. And even at the back there, towards the center of the photograph, you'll see a child bobbing around in the water. He looks really happy. Now, I don't know if he's just been removed because he couldn't cope, or if actually he's achieved, he's survived. And I don't think any of you listening to this will be wanting to produce a curriculum of survival. I think rather we'd be looking for a curriculum of experience, wouldn't we? A curriculum that allows children to absolutely immerse themselves in what they are studying. That picture, which if you want to know, is Henley-on-Thames in London. I think it's about 1903. That picture depicts for me something that I've been really, really passionate about in the last couple of years in my own professional research and learning, and that is the pedagogy of poverty. Now, if you Google the pedagogy of poverty, it takes you to a really, really fantastic article by an American academic and educator called Martin Haberman. He has been a big influence on my work of late, and certainly he was the basis of my master's recently. The pedagogy of poverty, to sum it up not very well, the pedagogy of poverty is essentially a position that a school can find itself in. A teacher in a classroom in that school can find themselves in, where they have just defaulted to the actual the baseline principles of what a lot of people think teaching is. If you asked a parent, what do you think teaching is? They would probably say, well, teaching is the setting of homework, the marking of homework, the setting of work, the marking of work, the assessment of work, and some feedback. That's the pedagogy of poverty. Those things are important, don't get me wrong, but I'm sure those of you listening to this now, you do a lot more besides that. And that's where we need to be aiming for. We need to be aiming for, if you like, rather than a pedagogy of poverty, but a pedagogy of power, a pedagogy of experience, where children are protected into learning and invited into experiences within that. Another version of the pedagogy of poverty is what I see happening a lot in England now, which is a sat-nav curriculum, where as teachers, we're being deprofessionalised somewhat by being given the schemes of work to follow, with no movement at all, no allowance for, if you like, professional imagination. We're producing a pub quiz curriculum where the children going through the system, if we're not careful, will be just really excellent pub quiz participants of the future, full of knowledge, which is important, but finding it a stumbling block where that knowledge has to be communicated, passed on, or placed into a different context. I've got 3 words that sum this up, if you like. And the 3 words, this is what I want, by the way, that I've just placed here. Curriculum is complex, but I've got 3 words to help us navigate our way through it. And I'm just going to show you them here. And I'd like you, as I'm talking about them, you have a think about what they mean to you. You can have these words. They're not mine, necessarily, but you may be able to think of 3 of your own. Because not only do these 3 words sum up where I think I am in my own professional journey, but also I think they're 3 important ingredients for the classroom. The first one at the top is the word Imagineering. If you're a Disney fan, you'll know that word, because that's what the Disney Corporation calls its research and development arm. But I do know that word had its first usage in the late 1930s, early 1940s in metal making, would you believe? The metal making industry. I've got a quote from about 1940 where it's used. It's a combination of imagination and engineering, obviously. And it's what the engineers used to do when they were tasked with having to create something new. When I think of that from a teaching perspective, I'm thinking, well, if I've got to teach ancient Egypt tomorrow, how am I going to do it a little bit differently? I've got it all written down, but what about the children in this room? How am I going to apply what's written down to those children in my care at this point? And that takes a bit of professional imagination. That takes a bit of Imagineering. The second word is a word I made up and I put in my first book, Oops, Helping Children Learn Accidentally. Botheredness just means, it's that protecting in. It's how do we get kids hooked in? How do we get kids bothered about what they're doing? How do we maintain that? If you've got a class of children, and I don't know, they're doing Romans, and we're going to teach Romans. The kids are going to need to know the facts and the knowledge, and we will do that. We may do that through direct instruction, we may do it through research, we may do it through some group work, but how do we maintain that botheredness? And the thing that I found out, and what I'm going to share with you in a minute, is that stories and narratives really can help us, really help us with that building of botheredness. And the third element, the third word there is the word phronesis. which I only stumbled upon in my recent research for my master's. And the word phronesis, it means professional wisdom. And again, and I may be being a little defensive here, but I worry when I feel that our professionalism is under threat. Because the one thing that we do all have in common is our professional wisdom. The things we learn with our own eyes and with our own experiences in our own classrooms. These days, I'm doing it in other people's classrooms, but I'm still learning a heck of a lot. If you like, wrapped up in those words, there's elements of mission. What's the mission for you and your classroom? What's the mission for your curriculum? What's the vision for your curriculum? And what are the values that you are hoping to instill in your children through that curriculum? And that's what those three words do for me. Have a moment, if you like, have a ponder about those three words and what they might mean to you. Don't spell phronesis wrong. If you replace the O with an E, you get phrenesis, which means madness and insanity. And we might have enough of that. So let me move on now, if that's all right. I'm going to move on to this idea of stories and hooks and so on. And I just Googled earlier, stories as a vehicle. I just wrote those words, stories as a vehicle. I just wrote those into Google. And this is an image that popped up. And I loved that image. And I just wondered for you, where's the story there? Where are the stories in that photo? What questions do you have for that photo? What I'd like us to stop doing is looking at that photograph and saying, oh, that's history. It looks like the American Great Depression. That's nothing to do with me in whatever your subject is. I just wonder, rather than just being subject teachers, if we just look at that picture as teachers, what emerges for us? That could be a hook to a scheme of work for a historian, but it also could be a scheme of work for a geographer. It could be a scheme of work for some children thinking about what it's like to have everything you own in one small place. It might seem odd to say, but that photo could be the start of a topic in primary around natural disasters. But I'll just leave that hanging with you for a minute. Daniel Willingham, the renowned cognitive scientist, Daniel Willingham, he describes stories as being psychologically privileged. By that, he means that we remember them. Information couched in a story can be more memorable, according to Willingham. If you Google Daniel Willingham's story, it takes you again to a really great article that's worth a few minutes of your time, and that really can be seen along with the Haberman piece I mentioned earlier to underpin this work. We remember parables, perhaps. We remember creation stories. We remember fairy tales. We remember stories from our childhood. Indeed, maybe already today you've told a lot of stories about what happened to you, perhaps at the weekend. Stories are important. And I have found in my work that stories can offer us a really good anchor to the curriculum, a really good vehicle for delivering curriculum. And if I just offer you this list, and I'm going to pause for a minute and let you have a think. I'm hoping if you've got some paper in front of you, this is the time where you can do some, if you like, some thought showering or brainstorming. If you just have a look at this list here, one or two of them seem a lot easier than others, but I just wondered if you could quickly jot down a list of curriculum coverage that these places offer to you. Let me give you some examples. I've got the farm, 3/4 of the way down there, the farm. Where is the curriculum in the farm? Well, when I've worked with early years children, the farm has been a rich source of curriculum. I worked with some children, again in the north of England, early years children, who had been to a farm. And when I spoke to them about their experience, and I asked them, well, what was the farm like? Was it a nice day? And they said, oh no, the farm was terrible. And that took me by surprise. They started telling me everything that was wrong with the farm. And before long, we put together a list of things that we could do to help the farmer have a nicer farm. We needed to fix the gate. We needed to change the light bulbs. We needed to make sure that the cows had a bigger field to be in. There was all sorts of things that the children wanted to do. And even at that level, where actually play and story are quite usual in obviously that early years setting, I found that the curriculum bubbled up in a really welcome way. Underneath the farm, I've written there the ice world. And when I think of the ice world, these are the things that fall into my head. Frankenstein, the story of Frankenstein, Mary Shelley, the study of Gothic literature, perhaps with older children, or as I have done it, with top primary. Frankenstein's book ended in the wilderness of ice. But also I'm thinking of Narnia and The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. With the ice world, I'm also thinking of conservation and that photograph that I'm sure we've all seen of the polar bear on the ice floe. So without taking up any more of your time right now, I just want to give you a few moments. Just pick one, pick two. Where's the curriculum opportunities in these places? And I'll shut up for a moment. I'm sorry, I'm finding it difficult to shut up because I'm reading this list and I'm thinking of all sorts of things that I haven't thought before. But you know what? This is what Imagineering is. It's looking at a list of places there and then thinking about the children you teach and the curriculum you teach and what these places offer to you. The forest could be Hansel and Gretel, but it could be the rainforest, couldn't it? The zoo could be that wonderful book by Anthony Brown. Or it could be the story of the giraffe, who we think is happy, but he really isn't. So how do you move a giraffe? The cave. I'm going to shut up, sorry. I hope you've got some stuff written down. If I was in the room with you, we'd talk about them and I could come and have a look at them. But maybe what you've got there is the beginning of something. Maybe you've started to think about something that you've done 100 times before. If you're a primary teacher, for example, and you look at the word, the pyramid, where have you gone with that? I wonder, for me, obviously the place where the pyramid is, I'm thinking of ancient Egypt, but I'm also thinking of who built the pyramids I'm thinking about the pyramid designers of ancient times. What would a pyramid design look like? How would it be recorded? And where is the mathematics in them? Do you see what I mean? I'm just going to give you another picture now. I'm going to move on from this, and I'm just going to show you another photograph now. And this photograph is actually from secondary, but I've used it in primary and I've used it in special settings as well, because I think this photograph is really rich. Again, I wrote about using this picture in my first book, Oops, Helping Children Learn Accidentally. I'm going to put the photo up, and I'm going to shut up again for a moment, but this is the task that I'd like you to do. If you've got that piece of paper in front of you, I'd like you to look at this picture, and I'd just like you to write down the questions that you want answers to. If you could ask the question out loud, what would it be when you look at this next photo? I'm going to model it for you. I'll ask a couple of questions that are real questions from children. Honestly, I've used this photograph a lot as a hook. And indeed, it's a famous photo, and it's easy to find. It's the favelas in Brazil, because that's the first question you've asked, isn't it? Where are we? So it's the favelas in Brazil, and it's a few years ago. But here are some questions from children. Is it expensive to live on the right-hand side of the photograph? Is it a hotel, or is it somewhere you live all the time? Who built the wall? Who's in charge of the wall? Is there a door from one side to another? I'll pause a moment and let you have a think about it. And here's some more questions from children. If there is a door, who has the key? Is the water clean on the left-hand side of the picture? Who cleans the hotel, assuming it's a hotel? And where do they live? If we're responsible for building the next stage of hotels in this area, what's the first thing we need to do? Who are the people we need to speak to? And I hope you can see there that there is a shift from the low-level questions of, but important questions of where are we, when are we. We can allow a shift, if you like, up a gear to bigger questions that actually could lead to ethical dilemmas and problems and challenges for children to negotiate. That's one of my favourite photos to use. I got this photo from a geographer. They were using it in their classroom, but pretty soon I was using it in English and in drama as well. I've also used it in primary when I've been wanting to place children safely into moments of tension. For example, there's someone knocking on someone's door to tell them that they have to leave their home. And it's getting to that point of tension and placing children in places where they are having to grapple with difficult knowledge. That's where children move, if you like, from what we'd all agree would be moments of engagement in learning to being invested in their learning. If you like, there's a bridge between engagement and investment. We're all happy, aren't we, when kids are engaged, and our leaders are. If there's a learning walk walking around your school and they come to you and all your children are engaged, we're all pretty buzzing about that. We're all happy with that. But I've realised that I would much rather than having a group of just children who are just engaged, I'd like to have children who are invested. And I've realised that a way to do that is to get them bothered about the work we're doing. And in some of the examples I've already given you, that botheredness can really thrive Engagement, I think, keeps kids dependent on the teacher. Investment invites independence. Okay, I'm just going to give you a practical example now. We've not got that much time left, but I'm going to show you a photo, just like the photo we've just looked at. But the question I want you to answer in your own minds or scribble down on your paper is, where is the curriculum? Where is the curriculum in this patch of wasteland? Where is the curriculum here? So if you just want to have a jot down, I mean, for me, I'm looking at that and I'm seeing a curriculum of science. I'm sensing it. Maybe there's some geography, but I'm no expert on that. Where is the curriculum? Now, in order to move to give this photograph more meaning, to build botheredness around this photograph, if you like, to use that word, this is what I do with the kids. I'll use this term with them, let's say. And this is a term that I've kept with me for a long time now. When I used to work with children with stories, I used to say, pretend, come on, pretend. I used to say, imagine this, imagine that. And many kids, because they want to please you, and most kids are compliant, they do it. But what I've found is that some kids find imagination difficult, particularly kids who've lived through traumatic experiences. The evidence is out there, or are currently living through trauma. Imagination can be inaccessible. But what I found is, let's say, is a lovely inductive phrase, and the feedback I get about those two words is great. People use it and it can work. So let's try it right now. So can you just go along in the spirit of this for a few minutes? This is some work I did actually in a special school, but the setting doesn't matter. Let's say there's a patch of land. It's 5 meters by 8 meters. And it's next to an old people's home. The old people's home doesn't know who the land belongs to. So they've just left it. And it's a bit of it doesn't look nice. It's a bit of an eyesore. Let's say that the old people's home have contacted us, because it turns out that the patch of land, 5 meters by 8 meters, it does belong to them. They found that they did the research. They got in touch with the local council, and the council have told them that yes, that patch of land is yours. Do what you want with it. In fact, the council say, we will give you some money to help you do something with that land. That's great news. So the old people's home have got in touch with us. Year 7, year 4, year 9. They've got in touch with us because they've asked us if we can help them design a garden of reflection. Reflection for the old people to enjoy. I think this is something we can do, you know. It's 5 meters by 8 meters. Let me sketch it out for you, what that looks like. And we've been asked to create a garden of reflection. Now, with the children, the task is setting itself up there. I might say to the children, have you got any questions? And a child might say, what's the garden of reflection? So that's something that we need to define. We might talk about the idea that it's 5 meters by 8 meters, but we might not dwell on it. We might have to figure out how big it is, and we might use the classroom to figure it out, to actually say, yeah, is this 5 meters by 8 meters? We need to measure it out, probably. We might also need to think about what it's like to be old. So can you see that there's a dancing around of curriculum here? But I've got an outcome that I need. I have deliberately set the story up in such a way that the children are going to be bothered about getting the job done. They're being given the responsibility to do this. Now, one of the questions I asked the children in the special setting was this: if we're going to do a good job and we're going to create a garden of reflection, what shouldn't we put in this place? And the children said things like, we shouldn't have stone pathways, we shouldn't have stones on the pathways, we shouldn't have steps, we shouldn't have a seat dedicated to someone who's died previously, and so on. These are the things we shouldn't have, and that helps us decide on the things that we should have. But what I'm trying to get across to you here is, you can see the story, I hope. The story emerges. And they're the children considering this stuff. But as you know, there's me just in the middle there, helping them through, because this isn't about gardens of reflection. This isn't about what it's like to be old. These are happy, accidental things we can consider. What we're actually considering is, how do we make 5 times 8 important to these vulnerable, some of them very challenged by life, boys in this particular class. How do we make 5 meters by 8 meters important? How do we make 5 times 8 important? This is numeracy, this is maths. But the way we've gone into it is simply through a story. Now, I'm conscious of time, and I can see I'm running out of time. But I hope that makes sense. The story builds the botheredness. It builds the investment. And this might be an image that you quickly want to capture. Narrative structure. This is just something I've created working with my colleague, Dr. Deborah Kidd. This idea of people, place, problem, and possibility. So when you're imagineering, if you're thinking about another topic that you're going to be delivering in a few weeks, and you've got time to consider it, I would like you to use this, to have a think about using this as a tool to help you. In your topic or your scheme of work, who are the people? Where are they? Where's the place? When are they? What are the challenges of the environments that these people or these voices are in? And what are the problems and dilemmas that could be thrown in their path? Those children that I've just described, when they were busy budgeting to redesign the garden, I said to them they were going to receive £5,000, and then I halved it 2 weeks later, so they had to reorganise their plans, and all of it was numeracy. So it was finding those little moments of tension that could perhaps help. And the possibilities element there is just, where is your coverage? If you're not covering your coverage, if this approach isn't doing the job that it needs to do, then it's worthless. Or we need to consider how we're using it. So I'm just, I'm not some sort of member of some weird storytelling cult telling you all this. I've just found that this is really useful, not just for delivery and pedagogy, but also for planning. And it warms the document up. So it's giving us a little bit more, if you like, a little bit more leeway in the classroom to apply our professional imagination, which I'd love to come and talk more about in the future. And it fights that idea of the pedagogy of poverty. What we get instead is a pedagogy of worth, a pedagogy of spirit, and a pedagogy of contribution. And that's not just for the children, that's for us as well as teachers. We have professional worth, professional spirit, and we're contributing more than just reproducing worksheets. And if you would like to know more on that idea of that, the warm pedagogy that I'm talking about here, again, go back to the work of Martin Haberman. He really is excellent. So to conclude, really, before we have a think about any questions, where are the people in your scheme of work? And don't forget, when I'm talking about people, I'm talking about voices. So 2 weeks ago, I was a giraffe. As I alluded to earlier, I was a giraffe declaring to year one that I was really unhappy in the zoo where I found myself placed. So there is the voice, the place, and the problem in one go. What are we really challenging our children with when we're asking them to solve that problem? And I'll offer you that again. When this is all finished tonight, go and have a think about the places where curriculum finds itself. Where is the curriculum? In the ocean, because there's plenty. And also, how do you invite yourself to change your stance and your agility in a classroom? And I'm conscious of time now, and just a couple of quotes, and then I'll hand back to Costa. When we use stories in class, I get all the time, and I've worked with thousands of teachers using this kind of approach. There's nothing to buy into here. It's actually just an investment into your own imaginations as professionals. But the feedback I do get is that teachers sometimes see their children operating very positively in ways that they didn't expect them to. So the quiet child, for instance, the passenger child, the ghost child, we see them speaking up, we see them having an opinion, and we see them, if you like, embodying that pedagogy of power. So just a little conclusion there. All learning is emotional, and stories, I think, offer a really good hook into navigating what can often be complex curriculum. So I'm just going to pause there, and I've got my contacts there on the screen. That's my Twitter, and there's Costa's Twitter there as well, Vina Edu. And I'd like to thank Vina tonight for offering me this opportunity to speak with you. I'm very proud to be associated with Vina. I've also got Facebook there. I know it says Facecloth, that was just a joke. But if you want to find me on Facebook, you can. Create, Learn, Inspire, Howell Roberts. And also there's my email, although you can contact me through Costa, through vima.co.uk as well. So if you're there, Costa.
I'm here, I'm listening. I've been listening. Thank you so much, Hal. That was very, very insightful, and lots of things for us to take away and for us to think about as teachers and about the curriculum. And there's lots, we're talking about curriculum a lot at the moment within education. So I think a lot of the things that you said in creating stories, getting children engaged and hooked, and owners of their own learning is really, really important. We've had some questions come in while you were delivering, so I hope you're able to answer them for us. If you do have some questions, then obviously do get them across to us. We'll be answering some questions in the next 5 minutes. If we don't get to answer your question, do email them into us, and then we will send you a reply. How we'll get back to you with some guidance and some support there. But the first question was, how did you come up with all these different ideas? Teachers are really busy. It's sometimes difficult to come up with lots of ideas. How did you come up with these different ideas?
I think sometimes it was out of necessity. If I can just say that, sometimes we think about behaviour management, for example, and the role of the teacher in class obviously is to manage it. And what I would find that I'd be teaching books, and I'd have to find that agility, Costa, where I would need things to help me teach some of the children in my class. And I found that actually tapping into the imagination really helped a little bit. I can think of numerous examples, but in terms of getting ideas now, I really do concentrate on, okay, who are the people in this? Where are they? And what are the problems? For example, if we're doing a scheme of work on rainforests, obviously we're in a rainforest, that's the place, but the people, that will be an indigenous tribe. So what's the culture of that tribe? How do they communicate? What are their values? We could really get into a deep study there, just looking at the people. We have the place, and then we have the problem. So with rainforests, the rainforests are getting cut down. So that's the dilemma and problem. How, as an indigenous population, do we combat that? How do we stop ourselves from actually, you know, joining the economic rat race and becoming loggers ourselves? I'm being very simplistic there, but I'm just trying to give you an example of that model that I've shared tonight, and sort of doing that imaginative work for you, for the teacher. Teachers are really busy. Teachers are really busy. But there's just a little model there that might help. It's also looking at the news. I look at the BBC Science news every day because there's always something really interesting on there that would work in a classroom.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much for that. I'm reading some of the questions that are coming in. So if I'm not always looking at the camera, it's because I'm reading the questions that are coming in as well at the same time. Just the next question, can you just explain a bit more? I've had a question come in about just the warm approach. Can you just summarize a couple of sentences about how can do some of this, and what you mean really about the warm approach?
I think what I mean by that, and I mean, I pretty much did my whole master's thesis on it, but what I mean by warm is it's the opposite to cold. I think a cold approach is one that's very clinical, and it's an approach in the classroom where, if you like, the children are silently sitting in rows, which might be appropriate sometimes, and they're just being delivered to. But I'm not sure that's an inclusive approach. I'm not sure all children learn best in that way. Some might. My idea of a warm approach is actually the teacher standing next to children, metaphorically and also perhaps physically, in their learning. The teacher being a little bit fallible. The teacher inviting discussion and debate that is useful. And that's useful from, you know, kids being 4-year-olds to undergraduates, I would have thought, or graduates.
And the different levels of questioning as well that leads up to the storytelling, which I think is really powerful. The environment, I mean, you know, not necessarily always, you know, teaching, you know, thinking about the layout of the classroom, I think is really important that you know, people can try out this week and think, you know, is this the right layout for what I'm teaching? Do I need to think differently and more creatively?
I had a weird experience just last week where I found myself, well, I was doing a teacher training thing, but they brought some kids in, which was wonderful. So I taught a lesson, and I mean, there's a picture on my Twitter timeline, I think, and on my Facebook, of me just teaching some children, but I'm actually on a stage in a theatre, and there's 68 adults. If the camera turned around, it was quite daunting. I was okay actually, but it was daunting for the children, and there was a good deal of protecting the kids in there, and I had to be very warm in my approach there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And just one final question that's come in. So from Kelvin in Nigeria. So we know you're listening, Kelvin. He's saying that how, you know, can you give any strategies? I know you've listed quite a few, but can you give any strategies for how he can apply some of these ideas to the children that he's teaching?
Right, I don't know how old his children are, and I don't know what his school's like, but I would have thought it's I mean, I was in Wales last week, and I was working on it was right on the coast, and the children were learning about the coast. Now, it seemed obvious to me that we should all just step out of the classroom and go and walk down to the beach because it was right nearby. And indeed, that's what the children do. My worry sometimes is that, I mean, I think that's a warm approach. And for Kelvin, I would ask him to look out of his window of his classroom and say, right, where's the curriculum outside my own classroom? Right at the start of this session, I talked about working with some children yesterday about local industry and the explosives industry in the 1930s around here. When the kids look out of their classroom window, they can see where that factory stood. It's now it's now an entertainment complex, but it was something else once. And I just sometimes wonder, and this is something, Kelvin, to think about, is that sometimes we're too busy looking at the curriculum document and we're not noticing, I don't know, the big thing that's walking past our window. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Again, bringing the curriculum to life is so important, and sometimes it's just what we've got out there. So I think and that's all we've got time for this webinar. We will be back for our final webinar of the academic year next month, and more information will be sent out to our schools about that webinar. Thank you so much, Hal, for giving us just a little bit of your time and insight into some of the things that we can think about as teachers and educators. I hope everyone's had fun this evening. We have. If you do want to get in touch with us, remember you can email us at cpd@vema.co.uk, and do go onto our website to access some of those resources that are there, and do get in touch with us if you need any other type of support. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a good evening, and we look forward to seeing you again soon online, very, very soon. Thank you very much. Good night.